It is with great pleasure that I introduce the guest of our program, Julia Sorokina, an artist, curator and a PhD. Julia, you were very fortunate to have had the opportunity to work with this amazing artist, Rustam Khalfin, to whom our today's program is dedicated. And this is my first question to you. The main period of Khalfin's work falls on the 80s-90s. Today we refer to this period as the time of total experimentation. The artists were internalizing a variety of visual languages and art materials, and Khalfin turns to installation, to environment, object, video art, to completely new forms. And of course he continues to paint. What kind of pictorial language do you think was closer to him, and why? In the first place, I think Khalfin is a Renaissance man. He did a lot of things, he knew and could do a lot. He started out as an architect. He had such a vision of the world, a holistic one. And he used a lot of different materials in his work. Even when he worked using the painting method, he always did some kind of research work. It was characteristic of him to work in a project mode. His architectural roots helped him a lot. Whatever he did, Khalfin drew on a lot of information, texts, various philosophical sources. Following a good architectural habit, he always built his work, that is, his project. Therefore, during the period when he went beyond the bounds of a picturesque canvas and started making installations, environments, he began to produce complex projects, multimedia, because for all that, this is indeed closer to him. Since this is his hypostasis or essence, and architectural as well.
Ипостась — это его сущность такая, и архитектурная в том числе.
Thanks to this exhibition, we have the opportunity to learn about various stages of his work. We observe here an interesting point. On the one hand, the influence of the Russian avant-garde and comprehension or an appeal to European modernism. There is both West and East, past and present. What prevails in Khalfin's work? In fact, it seems to me that this is a compound palimpsest. Therefore, we are dealing with what is now commonly called local modernity. That is, this is a local innovation, which means that the artist also attracts some kind of world heritage and builds a dialogue with this world heritage on the basis of those traditions and roots that are present here and now. And Khalfin just did exactly that. Actually, I must say that I'm no longer an artist. I'm engaged in curatorship and research in the field of contemporary art. Moreover, I defended my master's thesis on the basis of Khalfin's legacy. It is dedicated to him. In this work, I propose to name what he did nomadic modernism. This is just a local innovation when the artist speaks the language of modernism and postmodernism, but uses local, basic and pristine moments and archetypes. And it seems to me that it is difficult to say here whether it is a Western or Eastern phenomenon. He is a representative of local innovation. Nomadic modernism is an interesting term. In this case, do we precisely observe an appeal to nomadic culture in his work? By all means. In what way is it manifested? This is primarily manifested in the approach. He didn't come to modernism through his nationality because he didn't belong to the titular nation. His nomadism doesn't come so much from the bedrock nomadism. It comes rather from nomadism in a more philosophical sense, and it connects the fact that we are in the territory of the nomads in Kazakhstan with the heritage that was formulated by the European philosophers of the 20th century. He just unites all this in his work. That is why I call it nomadic modernism.
Поэтому я и называю номадический модернизм.
Which of the projects, in your opinion, was the most significant for him? From his biography, I know examples when a project became not only his highest achievement, but also a personal tragedy.
Высшим достижением. Конечно, глиняный проект — это такая квинтэссенция.
Undoubtedly, the clay project, which is such a quintessence of all his ideas. He invested such a complex idea in it. It was, in fact, his famous Eurasian utopia.
Была воплощена в этом проекте.
It was embodied in this project. And of course, when it was destroyed, this was the hardest moment in his life. You could even say a kind of a collapse. Therefore, he took it hard. A short explanatory note for the viewers. The clay project was a huge human figure, 18 meters high, located in the space of a two-storied building, which the artist was forced to destroy with his own hands 2 years after its creation. It was not a sculpture, it was a gallery, a kind of environment in which the parts of human bodies appeared. It combined the idea of tactility and clay as a fundamental principle. It also intersected with his idea of combination of emptiness and fullness, which he called pulota. There are clay pulotas in his works, when he places a piece of clay in his palm, then squeezes the hand, unclenches it, and the form of the clay left in the hand is the form of the emptiness that remains in the fist. In fact, all his works flow one from another. They make such a roll call permanently. In the works of the early period, one can see a roll call with his later works. He was also keeping a constant dialogue with the modernists. For example, he had a double alter ego. They were Marcel Duchamp and Joseph Beuys. He would also often conduct some kind of a dialogue with them. It is no secret that he often did performances in a felt hat, referring us very strongly to Beuys. He was fascinated by the work of these two artists. I think it was a kind of such a creative hello to them. In his work, Rustam Khalfin constantly turns to the concept of tactility, physicality. This has led to important discoveries. Please tell us about one of them using this work as an example. Here one can see how he tried to transfer physicality onto a picturesque canvas, onto a picturesque language. Although he has other kinds of attempts, but for a person who is familiar with his work, this is not just an abstract work. It may often seem that he has continuous abstractions. In reality, this is not an abstraction, it is a concrete thing. This is the so-called pinch. If you fold your fingers, you can see that the fingers are folded in such a way that there is some space in the middle, a hole between the fingers. 3 fingers and the space between them. In other words, it is an actualization of a body fragment, as well as a play with emptiness and with wholeness, which was important for him. But there is also another component called pulota or pulota. This is a combination of emptiness and fullness, the same principle, but shown through the inner space of the palm. In essence, this one is also a puloto, because he had different pulotas, not only the palm. This is generally the perception of the world through one's body, through the eye acting as a tester. He argued that our eye works like a kind of tentacle, so this is also about tactility. We don't muse about the fact that optics, the way our eyes work, is also a palpation of space. For him, the eye was such a tentacle which probes the space. Our eye, our vision, is also tactile. In the late 70s, Rustam Khalfin, shortly after graduating from the Moscow Architectural Institute, met Vladimir Sterligov, one of the outstanding followers of the Russian avant-garde. We know that Sterligov was one of the last disciples of Kazimir Malevich, as well as one of the founders of the artistic system, which was named Cup Dome. Rustam Khalfin, a young architect, an ambitious artist, an enthusiastic person, was greatly impressed by this acquaintance. So he studies an unusual, fascinating special system, a cup-domed system which was founded by Sterligov. He is carried away by this system, is studying it, along with the many works created at the turn of the 70s and 80s, and which were created in the style of the cup-dome system. The very system that explores the relationship between an object and the space, the very system that proclaims the subtraction of the form, the very system that designates the weightlessness of the world when the top and bottom are perceived as in the space where there is no gravity and where they change places. A paradoxical thing. When assembling the exposition, we involuntarily turned over many things, assembling these paintings in the exhibition space. Because this is a weightlessness, the light, airy, textural environment conveyed by pictorial materials, this is what is characteristic of many of Rustam Khalfin's works of the so-called Sterligov period. It is interesting that the Sterligov period was followed by others, his own scientific, technical, creative discoveries, which have made an impact on the entire further course of contemporary art development in Kazakhstan. In the early 90s, Rustam Khalfin created the Fragments series. Interestingly, this was a very important research moment for him. It was a correlation of a part of an object and the whole object, a fragment and its other constituent parts. I think that at the time when this happened in the 90s, when such compositions were created, he couldn't have imagined that this topic would become to some extent predictive for him. In 1999, the grandiose project Clay Project, Zero Level, took place. It presented a huge 18-meter-long human figure which was placed in the space of a two-storied building. This project, created by Rustam Khalfin together with his artists, assistants, co-authors, who helped to implement this grandiose project, was on display for less than 2 years. Shortly before the end of these 2 years, Rustam Khalfin was notified that he had to vacate the premises. He was destroying his own creation with his own hands, thus creating the very fragments, the foreboding of which had come 10 years before. In general, his life and work were filled with many mystical things. After he destroyed the Clay Project, he suffered his first stroke. He received an invitation to participate in an arts residency that was to take place at the World Trade Center, Twin Towers. Because of the stroke, he was unable to travel, and who knows how his life would have turned out had he traveled at the time of the 9/11 events in the US. Maybe fate was saving him from something. Pondering on and drawing parallels between the destroyed project, between his destroyed physical body, the stroke he suffered from had greatly affected his physical health. Between the destruction of the Twin Towers, grasping and continuing his theme of fragments, he creates a project named My Ruins, where all three personal creative projects are united. He conducts a creative reflection, calling it My Ruins. When Rustam Khalfin spoke about his wife Lydia Blinova, he often referred to her as alter ego. Indeed, she was his second self. There was so much harmony in this couple, both in terms of family, creative work, and human relationship, that Lydia's departure was very painful for Rustam. Many who knew them personally said that Lida was the generator of ideas. She constantly had unusual creative ideas, but she rarely brought them to the end, rarely actually realized them. In contrast, Rustam was a man of action, and the practical implementation of ideas was important to him. Even in this, they organically complemented each other. And so one of his later works, created shortly before his demise, he names in honor of Lida. Why this form? Why this color? It is because in the early 90s, in order to simply make ends meet, Lida worked part-time making jewelry from colored plastic, which was in great demand and was bought up by her friends. Interestingly, this small tiny figure made by Lida's hands from colored plastic was such a clear tangible thing that resembled her. And Rustam Khalfin, enlarging this composition, the form and color of this work, creates such a replica of the miniature done by Lida's hands and dedicates it to his beloved, his wife, his wonderful co-author, whom he often referred to as alter ego or my second I. In the early and mid-90s, Rustam Khalfin created a series of amazing self-portraits. When we muse what a self-portrait of an artist is, most often in the entire history of the development of world artistic culture, we see that the artist creating his self-portrait turns to a mirror. Khalfin takes a different path. He creates a series of self-portraits without a mirror, and naming them so. It is interesting that in these self-portraits he depicts himself as he sees his own figure placed in space. As the artist himself wrote in his diary entries, the corner of the eye, which denotes the border of space, relatively speaking, denotes the artist himself and the external space surrounding him. Speaking of Khalfin's work, one of the artists said, "The effect of claustrophobia is created as if I were inside the head of the artist, and musing, looking at this picture, I feel him gazing at myself through his own eyes." He creates this series, including in it several works. Some are more concrete, others less so.
Включает в эту серию несколько произведений.
And at the same time, there is an attempt to understand oneself. It is interesting that art is one of the tools for self-knowledge. It was the name of the series Self-Portrait Without a Mirror that was chosen as the title of this exhibition, because practically Rustam Khalfin, creating his works, has actually created a symbolic self-portrait without a mirror.